Okay, we welcome you to another episode of Learning Stories. This is a show where we profile a diverse set of learners from the 21st century. In each episode of this show, we profile a guest who has a unique story to share about how they acquired a set of unique skills and knowledge in a creative and innovative manner. In the process, we hope to uncover a new definition of learning as conceptualized, narrated, and imagined by the guest on our show. Today's guest, Sandesh Kini, is a dear friend again. He was born and brought up in Bahrain and then decided to study computer science and engineering. He got a Bachelor of Technology at the Manipal Institute of Technology. I mean, that's probably been a while now, but once he got his degree, in his last year of his engineering degree, he co founded a company called JobSpire, which was in the human resources space. And he worked on that project for about 2 years and 6 months. And it was eventually sold and acquired by a New York based tech recruiting platform called Just Code. After working on JobSpire for 2 years and 6 months, he decided to work with Just Code for about 7 months and he moved to New York City, which was must have been an exciting experience for him again. So right out of university in these 3 years, he did see a lot. After working with Just Code for about 6 to 7 months, he moved back to India and started working for Zipco, which was an on-demand AC bus service. And there's a lot more to that, but he was there as the product manager for about 2 years and 6 months again, Sandy, which was
Yeah.
in that range. Again, the entrepreneurial bug hit him towards the end of that journey, and he started a company, or co-founded a company called 622 Solutions. And one of the products he created at 622 Solutions was Invoice Falcon. And it was basically an automated invoice generating service on a platform called Shopify that allows independent businesses to sell online. Um, Eventually, again, this is something we'll find out in the interview. He started working for Shopify full time. He moved to Canada in March 2020, and he's been working at Shopify as a product manager ever since. And I mean, in 2 or 3 minutes, I've given you about 7 years of his career and his background and passion, but for different things. But apart from, uh, computer engineering and just product development, I think I've known Sandesh for a long time. There are lots of other things he's passionate about, and it's filmmaking, fitness, and I think this constant drive to, work on himself and get better on a daily basis, right? And these are little facts, Sandesh, but something I've noticed about your journey is your passion to solve problems using technology. And I'm going to be linking a couple of other things that Sandesh has worked on, including another interview from the Primate podcast, which I highly recommend you listen to in the show notes. But just to start off today's interview, Sandesh, the focus of this show is primarily helping younger people that are trying to figure things out at a younger age understand how they can go about creating careers or discovering what they want to really work on. And I'm thinking about your journey, Sandesh. What was Sandesh like um, as a student growing up in Bahrain? What were some of the things that you were curious about growing up? Let's just start there.
Oh, student life. Um, my memory is really bad, but as far as I remember, like most of it was just pretty much studying. I didn't really engage in any extracurricular activities for the most part. Um, yeah, it was, I think for the most part, my parents had instilled in my head that like getting good grades was paramount to my success in life. So pretty much starting from like I think the first standard or something, it was always about getting the top rank in the
Hmm.
class. So I pretty much it was pretty much first, second, third, or first, second, third, all the way until like 10th or 11th. And then in the 12th grade, I ended up like getting the highest marks, I think, in chemistry in the
Hmm.
country. So that was most of my time. But aside from that, I spent a little bit of time in theater. I was for some reason I got picked for a Hindi play, and I ended up doing pretty decently. So they wanted me, so I ended up doing like two more as well in the years after that. But that pretty much like summarizes like my student life. I wasn't really curious about much outside of it, I would say, for the most part. My only escape, I would say, was gaming. Like I loved gaming. I thought it was my escape from everything else. I would
Mm,
imagine like pretty much after I'm done with all my homework and everything, it would just be me in a room, 1 or 2 hours, just like playing whatever was the latest game that was out there.
mm.
And that fascination has even ended up like has continued through my life, like even today, where I spend like a couple of hours gaming. Like it's been a great way to relax. It's been a great way to like learn and like bond with friends. Um, yeah, I think that pretty much like summarizes it.
That's it. I mean, it's nice. I know gaming is a big passion of yours, Sandy,
Yeah.
but and I'm a high school teacher, and one of the things we learn about as a teacher is to think about the zone of proximal development. And
Mm,
it is that stage where it is just slightly above your current skill level,
mm,
right? And I feel like what I've noticed in terms of your growth as an individual, you have a clear understanding of where your skill level is at, and you're constantly pushing the boundary in terms of moving to the next stage. So if you had to help me understand, like I know, you studied computer science in high school in grade 11 and 12, and you also
yeah.
studied computer science at university for 4 years, right? And how did you balance that with your own independent sort of learning path to develop the skills you needed to develop to create products that you eventually created? Like, and that is something, because I know, I was looking through your LinkedIn and I noticed that one of the courses you took was a course from Wesleyan University for social psychology. So
Yeah.
I'm just curious, because I feel like there is something in terms of constantly becoming better, but also understanding where you are at with your skill level. So if you had to tell me how you developed your skills for computer science, or coding and product development in general, where do you think that started and how do you think that evolved over
Yeah.
time?
That's a good like question. I think just to take a step back, most people find it a little difficult to choose like what kind of stream they would want to end up in, like 11th and 12th, and that eventually dictates like where you go in college. For me, it was a no-brainer. Like I pretty much remember saying, I'm going to do computer science because aside from school, all the time that I spent was on computers. It, and I think I would like to blame my dad for it because whenever he would like buy something new, he would give me the whatever the device it was replacing, like the old one, and I would just like tear it apart and just try and do something with it. Or I would literally just take a hammer and break it. But my fascination for like computers pretty much like my dad is to blame for that. And so that's how I ended up like getting into it and eventually decided to do computer science. Um, as for like balancing things, like which was your first question about like how do you figure out like the path between academy and like pursuing your own interests. I think you have to know, like if I had to really summarize it, it was about like working smartly instead of working hard.
Mm,
So the course will dictate that you do certain things. The course will dictate you have to complete your assignments, your homework, your exams, and all that stuff. But there's a lot of like free downtime in between.
mm,
And you need to figure out like at what point do you need to push yourself towards that thing, and what point do you can like completely relax and do all the other things that you want to do.
mm,
So there would be these key moments, like let's say like 2 3 days or like a week or 2 weeks leading up to something where I would dedicate my time and get that out of the way. But aside from that, I had pretty much like free time.
mm.
So I would just use it to do whatever I could think of, like whatever I could indulge myself in.
Interesting.
um, in computer science itself, I would say like I didn't learn much from my time in college,
Mm,
but I really didn't believe like doing a job or like getting into the recruitment process in the last year of college was my calling card. Like it really didn't feel like that whatsoever. So I was ready to do like whatever it took
mm,
to not do that. And so I ended up meeting like a bunch of friends who eventually became the co-founders of JobSpire. And I didn't know anything. Like I didn't know how to code. I didn't know how to um, do whatever it required to like build a product. But piece by piece, like I had a guide, like his name is Varun Maya, like he's I think running another business right now. He would give me like piece by piece like things to solve, and then eventually like there's a state of flow. I think like it's commonly said, and might have heard of it, where basically you're learning, you're at your best spot for learning when like there's when you have the difficulty and the reward, like not scaling up exponentially like this, but like eventually going like this.
Mm.
And if you're able to take those steps, like you will keep learning, you'll keep wanting to improve because that is your state of flow.
Mm.
So um, leveling up for me was like constantly being in that state of flow. I first learned about testing, which is like, how do you test what someone else has written in code? Like, how do you make sure that it's functioning exactly as you want it to?
Mm.
And the next step was, how do you build this small little like button that you want to place on the website?
Mm.
The next step was, once you click that button, like what exactly should happen? How do you build that? And then the next step beyond that was, this customer wants to do something. What would be the best way for us to like build that out?
Mm.
So step by step, I learned about development and product management. And that's pretty much like how I ended up like where I am today.
Oh, yeah. That I mean, it's really interesting to see how, having a real world problem to solve, Sandy, it actually gives you motivation to develop the necessary skill sets to actually solve the problem, right? And I
Yeah.
feel like what's interesting in what you just said is um, the fact that you picked up skills as they were needed and required, but you also had people guiding you, you know, at the right time to develop those
Yeah.
skills.
I
And
think, yeah,
yes,
sorry, just not to cut you off, but
no.
like I think having a real world example is, or some sort of real world challenge, I think is, I figured out is very important for me, because
Mm.
otherwise I don't try to push myself. Like it has to be in some form very important to me. And I think a real world challenge is the best, is a really good representation of that. So we had the same thing even with filmmaking, for example. Um, when we first got into it, we used to use this really like bad software called Windows Movie Maker. Um, it's god awful, but that's the only thing we knew how to use, and we actually ended up making like a bunch of short films out of it. But eventually, like we reached a point where we realized that this is not going to cut it for us.
Mm.
um, and so we took that next step, which is using like Adobe like Premiere Pro, like an
Mm.
actual video editing software. And that came about only because we wanted to submit another film to a short film festival, and Windows Movie Maker just kept crashing and like not giving us what we wanted. So we had to switch, learn the entire thing, and then submit the film. So that was one of those like real world challenges where we learned something and just like pushed ourselves ahead.
Wow. Okay. This is just to backtrack a little for our viewers. Like one of the things, Sandesh is really passionate about is filmmaking. And when he was at university, he created a YouTube channel where he had tech reviews and short films, which I will be linking in the show notes. And some of these short films won national film award competitions. But a lot of these videos got a lot of views in a very short amount of time. And again, the tech reviews build on his passion for technology and a lot of the things that he's constantly exploring independently. But Sandesh, um, I'm curious about your experience at Manipal. Like you grew up in an NRI setting, and then you get transported to another environment in another country. I mean, Manipal is technically like close to a region you're probably from. Are you from Karnataka in India, Sandesh?
Yeah, I'm from Mangalore.
From Mangalore, perfect.
Yeah.
So we probably have that in common as well then. But what was it like at Manipal? Like to start off with, what do you learn in a 4-year BTech course in engineering? What are some of the things that you normally, I mean, you don't have to give me like details of subjects, but if you can give me an overview of how the 4 years are structured in general, that would be helpful, just for someone that's curious about that
Yeah.
part as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think the undergrad was pretty much like a standard like 4-year course. So your first year is um, for all the engineering streams, like you build a foundation of engineering.
Mm.
They teach you about like physics, chemistry. Um, I think there's more specific courses within each one of them, and math as well. But they essentially try to lay a foundation that you can then use in all the other all the specific like degrees as well. So
Mm.
that's year one, and then year two, three, and four, you're essentially like building up your knowledge about computers and all that stuff. Like your year two is just again the fundamentals of computer science, like data structures and all that kind of stuff. And then by year four, you're essentially using those concepts to like write code, create things, learn about like how you can program hardware, things like that.
Interesting.
Um,
And
that's
sorry,
it.
just to,
But
like think about, so do you decide your stream in year two, like the field you want to specialize in, or do you know that coming into the program?
yeah, I think you know you're supposed to like decide that coming in, but I've also seen people like switch around simply because like year one is a foundational year and it doesn't really affect like what happens in two, three, and four.
Mm.
So I've seen a lot of people like switch around, but in general, you select it before you get it.
Interesting. And like, what about the Sandesh beyond academics? Like, what were some of the things? Because, I mean, how did this passion for filmmaking develop, Sandesh? And just to give the viewers a little background, like, way back in the day, Sandesh actually was so kind. He made a video for one of the projects I was working on, and he was so kind with his time. So thank you for that little video, Sandesh. But how did your passion for filmmaking develop in school, and what were some of the creative projects you worked on, and not just filmmaking? Maybe if you could tell me about theater and the Dramatic Society. Like Kunal was somebody we interviewed on the show like a couple of episodes ago, and he told me that both of you would, like meet up and hang out and do stuff together. So I'm curious about that, Sandesh, too.
Yeah. I I don't really know like where that drive started from, but the only like memories I have of it now is meeting like a bunch of people who are in theater
Mm,
and just like connecting with them, just being able to like have a great conversation, make a ton of jokes, and just do like stupid things. And for me, that's where it kind of started. um, I think Kunal might have mentioned as well, like we have this friend Neeraj,
mm,
and there was this other, I think, senior in college as well. So it would just somehow we all got to know each other. Somehow we all had the same sense of humor, and then we all started doing things together. And I got, and the senior ended up like pulling us more into theater, more into dramatics, more into like understanding what is it about acting, what is it about filmmaking, and that kind of stuff. So there was, I think, a college festival where we had to like submit short films. So we just made like two very random, very weird videos, very
mm,
weird trailers, and we just submitted them. But that experience was so great that we just sort of stuck on with it. Along that same time, like the theater club was also, the dramatics club was also doing plays, and they were looking to audition actors for it. We ended up auditioning and we got into one of them. So we went to Goa, we acted it out. I think we got like second or third place or something, I don't remember.
uh,
um, but through that we ended up like getting really deep into it. But even though it was a dramatics club where the highlight of the year is one doing one play, where you call in like a 500 600 seat crowd, for me and Neeraj especially, it was, we were more interested in the filmmaking aspect of it. We were more
mm,
interested in like just the camera and like what you can do with it. So we just kept at it. Like we just kept creating more films. We just started doing more trailers, more weird things, and we started submitting our short films to the college festival as well as like some others out there.
mm,
We ended up doing pretty well, and we realized that we have a knack for filmmaking that probably a lot of others don't.
mm,
So that's pretty much like where I started building a little bit more. And then eventually the Dramatics Club realized that this could be a big part of like the club itself. So they ended up creating a whole like short film unit. And Neeraj and I were one of the first like heads of that unit, and to try and recruit more people to try and get more filmmaking happen in the Dramatics Club. Kunal was pretty much, I think Kunal maybe has a passion for acting, or maybe he did before, but he was also one of those people who we introduced him into it. He started hanging out more with us, and just, it's one of those things where it just like clicked for him, and he
interesting.
decided to get into it even more. And now it reached a point where he's like doing ads and, movies and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it's so like if you think about it, the two people in the same environment. are motivated by completely different things, right? Kunal probably pursued the same degree but took a very different path,
Yeah.
because what really got him going was his passion for acting and filmmaking too, because I know he pursued that in terms of ad filmmaking with Neeraj as well,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
um and
Yeah. That's actually a good thing. Like we were, I think like we in general, or what I really value about my friends is that we're all really like internally motivated to push ourselves and to do different things.
Mm,
So along with doing short films, we also figured out like what more can we do with this, because clearly the degree is not engaging us enough, like studying in college is not engaging us enough, so what else can we do with this? And so we ended up like finding clients to make films for, so we could make a
mm,
little money out of it. We ended up making, I think, maybe a couple of lakhs in college, just like
wow.
going to one of these like Udupi, there was a festival in Udupi, like a religious festival that somebody wanted to shoot. So we ended up like doing 2 days of that. And then somebody else wanted a video of their remote control cars uh, contest, some sort of racing contest. So we did a lot of this stuff, and we realized like, wow, we can also make money out of this. These were some of the few projects that we did where we also like skilled up.
Wow. Okay. So, do you think this was like the first like sort of entrepreneurial project you worked on, or were there other sort of entrepreneurial things you worked on? Because I want to jump into JobSpire after this, and more focused on your understanding of the problem that you were trying to solve there. But apart from like the filmmaking entrepreneurial venture, were there other like similar experiences you had with entrepreneurship, Sandy?
I don't think so. I think filmmaking was one of the first ones, but it was like entrepreneurial in different ways. One
Mm,
of the ways was what I just mentioned, which is where we try to find clients and make films for them.
sure.
The other one was we would just make videos for YouTube, just like content. We had this character called Dr. Howdo,
Mm.
who would just uh, make videos about how to do a certain thing, and it would be just like 5 minutes of jokes, pretty much. So we did those for a couple of episodes. That I consider as an entrepreneurial thing as well, because there was nothing really like driving us to do it other than the fact that we wanted to really challenge ourselves and maybe even consider making a business out of creating content for YouTube.
Yeah.
So that's where it started. Yeah, that's where the entrepreneurial journey started. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something that like, a lot of us can also think about, right? That you feel like you need to have certain skills to be an entrepreneur, but you can be an entrepreneur in several different ways. For instance, people make a living out of creating content on YouTube, and that was one of the paths you possibly pursued there. And I think that that is something a lot of people are also pursuing, but can pursue as an alternate pathway if they're interested in something. You think you can convert that into a product or a service that people may find value in, and I feel like you were able to do that in that sort of space at university, Sandy. And like I want to jump into your last year of university, Sandy. Like JobSpire, like I'm looking at the companies you worked for until now, and if I had to break it down to 5 sentences, like JobSpire, it is a virtual and experiential job search platform. If you look at Just Code, it's a tech-based recruiting service that has a particular platform that lets companies test candidates they're going to be hiring in a very tech-specific way, right?
Yeah.
If you look at Zipco, it's an on-demand AC bus service, and if you look at Shopify, it's a space for people to take their physical businesses online. So in four lines, I'm looking at the vision statements of the companies that you were associated with. But all of these companies, they want to solve a problem, a pain point. And one of the things you mentioned in the Primate podcast as well, Sandesh, was that product companies are trying to solve a problem, right? Some sort of problem, make your life easier in some way. So like when you were in your fourth year of college, right? How did you identify this pain point for JobSpire in specific? And maybe tell me how you found the people you eventually found to create that sort of community and build that startup. Because a lot of people that are in university, in an engineering course will be listening to this, And they're probably curious about how you developed that network, but also identified a valuable problem that is worth solving. So, how did you identify that problem and go ahead building that product?
Yeah, I think the before I get into that, I do want to mention that um, your first try will never be perfect, but the idea is you got to keep trying,
Mm,
because that's exactly what happened to us with JobSpire.
mm,
Um, I don't, to be honest, like I don't really know much about human resources or recruitment in general. Like I was a third year student in college.
mm,
Um, but what we really, really wanted to do, um, once I met like the other co-founders, what we really wanted to do was just chart a path for ourselves that's not getting into a job, getting into a 3-year bond, doing an MBA, like that path. Like I wasn't very interested in that, and the other people that I was working with as well weren't interested in it either.
mm,
So I think there's two co-founders of at that time, like Varun and Karthik. Both of them had experience freelancing. Like they were essentially software like freelance developers. They
mm,
would get clients from Upwork and they would build some sort of product for them using like Ruby on Rails and HTML, CSS. And they would make money like 15, 20, $30 per hour, which is like great. By the end of it all, like they made around 30 lakhs in the first year.
wow.
So they already knew that it was possible to create that life where you don't have to take a job, like you can figure something out for yourself.
Mm,
And I always felt the same for myself as well, because I did a bunch of stuff with filmmaking. So that was where things sort of clicked.
mm,
As for figuring out like what the problem was, um, when we first started, we saw a bunch of like companies in Europe, I think. I don't remember the name of the platform now, but
mm,
they were trying to bring a different sort of experience to companies finding talent and talent finding companies. The
mm,
typical way is there's a job post, there's an application like where somebody describes in 1,000 words like what you have to do and what you have to bring in terms of like qualifications. Um, but the way this platform was trying to solve the problem was by essentially giving you a look into the culture of the company and the
mm,
people there.
mm,
So they would have pictures of the office, they would have pictures of people, they would have quotes and testimonials and all the kind of like non non-job description information to try and give you a sense about whether this company is worth working for.
mm,
Because um, the job only, like when you look at a job description or even when you get into a job or a career, like it only tells you so much. The company that you work at, the culture it brings, like how it treats its employees, those all make a really big difference. And
mm,
I think with COVID and all now, like it's even more so. Like people are looking for companies that have like 4-day work weeks and just like remote life and work from home and flexibility. So we wanted to bring that aspect of culture, or that platform was trying to bring that aspect of culture into this matching process. And we
mm.
felt like maybe there's an opportunity for us to do that in India. And
Interesting.
so for us, it was literally like, okay, we know this idea is sort of being like experimented with in other parts of the world. Let's see if there's a chance for us to do that in India.
Mm,
And I think what gave us a little hope about this idea working was that there were at that time, I would say like 2014, 2015 was when there was like a burst of startups. Like typically there were just like companies that you would just go into like up until that time, but India started really taking off with like just people deciding to not take up jobs and solve product pain points and raise funding and just build companies and essentially their own livelihood out of it.
mm,
And I think that requires, to take that kind of risk requires a new generation or a different mindset when it comes to talent.
mm.
So we felt like there was a match there between the new up and coming companies and how we think recruitment should change.
Interesting.
So that's where we started off. We
Got it.
built the product, we built the platform. Um, but the reason I said that we didn't get it right in the first try, like where we or that your first try might never be right, is because we eventually didn't end up getting that right. We
Mm,
realized that recruitment in India especially is way far behind. Like in general, I think there is a big problem. Maybe this is worldwide as well, but what we saw in India was that there is a severe lack of quality when it comes to talent. And
Mm,
I think the education system is partly to blame. But when you go for a job, like they're looking for skills, like do you know the stack? Like, do you know how to solve problems? Do you know how to do this specific thing?
mm,
Especially when it comes to startups. But when you go through a degree, you don't learn any of that. Like you're
mm,
taught the basics, like the absolute bare minimum. And even on technology that's like, I don't know, 15, 20 years old. So we realized that there was a fit, but that fit was very small and probably not one where we would make money.
mm,
So towards the end of it all, like towards the end of JobSpire, where we were trying to figure out our future, the core product changed from creating an experiential platform for job seekers and companies to just something a little, I would say a little, a lot better than what you would get typically from the market, like a Naukri or a Times Jobs or something like that.
mm.
So we weren't saying, hey, there's a database of talent that you can come in and buy from us. We
Yeah.
were more like, give us your job posting. We'll try and figure out what is the best talent for you. So we
Interesting.
had people in house, and we also had an algorithm where we try to match people better instead of just throwing people at the problem, instead of just throwing like applications at a job.
Wow. Okay.
That became our core product. And then we also started thinking, now that we knew that there's a severe lack of quality when it comes to talent, like what more can we do to
Mm,
actually solve the bigger problem in our heads? So we started conceptualizing this thing called Pathfinder,
mm,
where the hope was that we could, let's say like you come in like you're in your 10th or 11th or 12th, and you're trying to figure out like what are you passionate about, like how can you grow and eventually get into a career. Like
mm,
we would tell you, we would chart a path for you that's not just about like selecting the colleges, but also like what are the specific companies looking for when you get into that career, and
mm,
how do you get those skills, like what sort of courses do you need to take, maybe from a Coursera or something like that? What sort of communities do you need to join? Like who are good mentors and people who could help you learn what you need to know to
mm.
get into that career? Maybe an evaluation of your mindset, of your psychology, so we can figure out like how can we connect what you think with what is right for your career, like what is a good career for you. So that ended up being like the ultimate two products where we landed on.
Okay. Yeah, and because I feel like there are so many things that I noted from what you just said, Sandesh. Because the first thing you said was about thinking about how uh, you saw something happen in another country that could be replicated in this particular context, and that is actually a very interesting way to look at ideas that may work in different contexts. Obviously, there is the cultural barrier you have to break, but you notice that human resources, I mean, it probably at the end of the day is trying to get the best people in the best jobs, right? If it's working in another country in a particular way, could you bring that here? And the other thing I thought about when you shared your story was the idea of empathy, because you basically were looking, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, you were also thinking about your own recruiting experience as a software developer, and thinking about what companies were looking at when they were hiring you. So in a way, you were looking at your human resource experience and slowly using that to build this product. And if you think about it, your experience can become, or even the experience of your co-founders, and that small community of developers sort of became a small model for what is possible in a larger scale, right? So if you are able to meet the need of a small community of people that want high quality software development talent, maybe you can transfer that onto other fields and other sectors, right? But
Yeah.
also your ability as a company to pivot, right? You decide to solve a particular problem, but then you jumped into Pathfinder and creating that career learning ecosystem. And I feel like these three or four things are so important, because everyone feels you create something and then you sell it. And I think there's so much more happening in that sort of space. And I think having the right people with you in your team is so important, but thanks for helping us understand that journey, Sandesh. But maybe if you could tell us a little more about working with your co-founders at that point. I think it was Varun and Karthik. Was it
Yeah.
Karthik?
Yeah.
So like, how did you how did the four of y'all eventually decide to, I mean, how did you meet each other to start off with, and how did you eventually decide to, go on to do other things and sell the company, and what was motivating that decision? So.
Yeah. I think like just to go like take a step back to your point about empathy, um, our experience was in building the product, but not necessarily like the recruitment space.
Mm.
So none of us actually went through a recruitment process as such,
Okay.
but we just had an inkling of or a thought that maybe what is working there will work here.
Mm.
But empathy was still one of the biggest things that ended up working well for us, because all we did day in day out was try and talk to customers to figure out what we're doing wrong and what we're doing right.
Mm.
So the pivot, the idea of figuring out Pathfinder, like the core product, like changing all of that, was essentially us talking to companies day in and day out to figure out where we are going wrong, like what is missing in the product, what would they eventually pay for.
Mm.
So that got us to that stage. But aside from that, like we had zero recruitment experience. We were a bunch of like third year, fourth year students just trying to figure something out, trying to solve problems for companies.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, that's that. As for like how I met all the co-founders, I think Varun was my main point of contact. He was primarily the person like who put the team together, and I met him because he was in my class.
Okay.
And around like 2013, um, I started going to the gym because I think I'm pretty sure like I shared this to you in the notes as well, and probably a lot of people know, but I used to be like a very fat, obese kid. Like I tipped the scales at 110 kilos, like around summer 2013. And around that time, I started going to the gym. I sort of fell in love with the process. And it just so happened that Varun was at the gym as well. So we would end up training together. For some reason, he took me under his wing. We started going to the gym together. We started talking a lot more. And we realized that we connected on quite a few things. Like we
Mm.
connected on how we thought about life. We connected on, how we train and how we think about people and all that good stuff. And that eventually like blossomed into like a really strong friendship.
Nice.
um, he would sort of like read a bunch of books, try and learn a bunch of things, and I would do the same thing as well. We would share notes on the books. Um, so I think around summer 2014, I was trying to figure out like what should I do next.
Mm.
I was like my parents sort of suggested that I should go into an MBA next, like instead of getting into like recruited by a company, but I wasn't interested in that like whatsoever. And so around that time was when I started speaking to Varun, and he said he had an idea about like trying to build a product or just in some form or some shape or form, like getting out of the recruitment process.
Mm.
So I didn't know any better. Like I just realized that I didn't want to do the other thing. So I gave in my 100% into that.
Got
And
it.
so like right before I explained like how I got into testing and software development and product management. Varun knew Karthik because they used to freelance together. So they would essentially create products for their clients. And so they had their own business, like where they would
Mm.
just do that. Mohak was also another like classmate of ours. So he was involved in an organization called ISEC, where I'm not really sure what exactly they do, but I think they're involved in giving people experiences through exchange programs or
Mm.
something like that, giving
Yeah.
them like experiences abroad. So he did a whole bunch of like um, business development and management in the organization. So we felt like he was a good fit for the sales and business development aspect of the company,
Got it.
because other than that, it was just heavily focused on product and technology
Yeah.
amongst the three of us.
So it was the three of you working on the tech piece and Mohawk probably building the sales and
Yeah,
business side, right?
exactly.
Awesome. Okay. So, and like once you were done with that, you decided, I like Sandesh, when do you know that this is enough, or this that you have to move on to the next thing? Because I noticed that after JobSpire, you worked with Just Code for a while because they were the company that acquired JobSpire, but then
Yeah,
you moved on to working with Zipco, and then you know eventually again going into 622 solutions and building Invoice Falcon. But do you feel like that transition stage happens when you feel like um, your ability to add value in a way that you want to add ends? Or I mean, because I think like one of the skills that's really important to develop as professionals is when to say no, or
Yeah.
when to move on to something that you feel is most ideal for your career. And I feel like you've put a lot of thought in the last 7 years into choosing professional opportunities that will really help you grow, whether it's
Yeah.
JobSpire or Zipco, or even now moving into Shopify and your work here. So how do you decide when to move on to the next thing?
Yeah, that's a great like question. I think the answer for me, to like very like briefly summarize it, is when I wake up in the morning and no longer think about it.
Mm,
So that's pretty much the biggest decision factor for the
yeah.
most part in switching between companies and trying to do different things. Um, with JobSpire, I think we cared deeply about the company, like we cared deeply about the product we built and the companies that we were working with. But I think at some point the interest waned, and I'm not really surprised about that for the most part because we were just college kids. Like
Mm,
we didn't have the, let's say, the professional knowledge or something of that sort to be able to like keep grinding at it and try and figure out like what is next.
mm,
It's just we knew how to do many different things, and JobSpires didn't end up becoming that important in our heads.
sure.
But at the same time, we were also getting a lot of like offers from other companies about a potential acquisition. So we were talking to two or three of them. And so the timing just sort of like clicked for us.
Got it.
Um, I think some part of it in like the acquisition of JobSpire, like one of the bigger factors was that we all eventually realized like we're really good at creating things,
Mm,
but maybe our interest isn't in how to take that thing and scale it.
got it.
We felt like 2.5 years into it, we did a pretty decent job with getting it up to a certain point, but
Yeah.
now we're probably not the right people, or maybe our interest isn't even there. So these all sort of things that click together into like an acquisition.
Mm,
With Just Code, with Zipco, it was simply a matter of my interest in like continuing to do things.
got it.
I think for the most part, or at least like personally, I find it, I not I find it, I want that the work that I do to be meaningful to me,
Got it.
or I want it to drive me in some form.
Mm,
And I think when that drive is lost, I pretty much know that I won't be able to deliver my best, and I need to figure out like what else I can do.
nice.
Um, that's what happened with Just Code and Zipco. With Invoice Falcon, it was just like an opportunity that made sense for me. If we were doing pretty well, like incredibly well with Invoice Falcon, but there was an opportunity for me to push myself beyond what I thought was possible at
Mm,
that time. And so things just worked out. But with any other sort of like entrepreneurial journey that I've taken with like YouTube or even some sort of like fitness stuff as well, essentially it's been um, my ability to like wake up and think about it in the morning. If that is gone, that means that something is missing in it and I need to let it go and
yeah.
think about the next thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, I mean, I think you summarized it really well, Sandesh, and I feel like that is something that, a lot of us are not able to put as a priority. Sometimes we feel like staying with the job is important because it gives us the benefits. But then if you feel like you aren't really adding value, or your skills in the company doesn't have a good match, sometimes it's important to make that decision about moving on to the next thing. And
Yeah.
not be guilty about it, but also be brave enough to take those risks early on. So kudos to you for taking those risks early on in your career.
Yeah.
And I
I,
remember, sorry, go ahead, Sandesh.
yeah. I just want to add on to that. Like, I think, like when I say these things, I kind of realize that it's definitely from a very sort, not very, but kind of privileged situation. Like
Sure.
I have the comfort, I have the ability to just like take risks and figure out like what I want to do.
Yeah.
But there's another bigger aspect to it, which I think people should probably spend a little bit of time thinking about, and that is like how much do you trust yourself with taking risks?
Mm,
Like how much do you trust yourself with being able to push through like any sort of difficult situation or ambiguity or not knowing what lies ahead? For the most part, I trust myself. Like having done this a little bit, even through college, like even after that, I've reached a point where I know that I can trust myself.
mm,
If things were to go bad, or if I don't feel great doing this thing, I will be able to get to a point, to a more comfortable point, if I just let it go.
mm,
Right. So it's one of those things that drives me to make like decisions more comfortably, that I can trust myself with um, trust myself with whatever decision has to be made, and then seeing it through
Nice.
once it's been made.
Yeah, but even your point of privilege, right, Sandesh? I feel like, I mean, it's not something that was given to you on a plate, right? Even though a lot of people think you developed skills on your own. You did study computer science for about 6 years in high school and university. And, you also showed the initiative to develop additional skills because you realized that the formal system wasn't up to date. And if you think about it, you've spent a good, 10 to 11 years, learning the skills you need to learn to be good at your job. So it's not like it was given to you on a plate and you're
Yeah.
constantly working on it on a day-to-day basis. And that, and I know you talk about Invoice Falcon and your work there, in the Primate podcast, and you've also spoken about it in other places. Like, what I want to jump into, Sandesh, is another big passion of yours now. Apart from your professional endeavors, your journey in terms of fitness, right? Like, and that big transformation. Personally, we both knew each other from school, and like in school. And I remember something you said in the Primate podcast about, thinking about the idea of, being a bully, right? And you know, the reason sometimes that we are a bully is because we don't want to have certain conversations where people bring up things that we are possibly insecure about, right? And so it doesn't come from a bad place. And also the idea of taking control of your body, it's not something that a lot of people teach us about. So when did this bug for, this passion for fitness and working on your body, develop? If you I know you said 2013 was that changing point, but if you can, take us back to how this started and where it is now, that would be really interesting to hear.
Yeah. I honestly, like, throughout school, high school, college, for the most part, like, didn't really take care of my body. Um, I having looking back at it now, like after reflecting on like all those years, I kind of realized like food was more or less an escape for me. From similar to gaming, like food was an escape for me. I
Mm,
don't really know like why it ended up being that way, but it was just one of those things that I felt more comfortable when I ate food.
mm,
Like when there was something that I wasn't happy with, maybe a fight with my parents, or maybe something some girl said in school, or maybe that I didn't get my grades, like food was pretty much, um, it was my reward and it was my escape.
mm,
And unfortunately, like through a series of like events in life and stuff, it ended up like reaching a tipping point of like 110 kilos, like back in summer 2013.
mm,
Um, the way I look like influenced a lot of my relationships with friends. Like you said, like I was very insecure about my own self, like the way I looked. Like I hated how I felt like when I would try running, for example. So I would just never do any of that.
mm,
Um, so like even uh, these days, like I think back and reflect about how much of a bully I was, simply because I didn't want anybody to look at me and sort of make fun of me. So I would make fun of other people who were fat and pretend like it wasn't, like I wasn't anywhere close to that whatsoever. But the reality was very different. Um, I got into fitness for the most part, I would say, by chance,
mm,
really. It's not like there was anything specific where I wanted to. It wasn't like I looked at the scale and thought, holy shit, like I am way too fat. I need to change something about it. Like I'm not getting what I want.
mm.
But I sort of started going to the, so my parents moved into a new house like when I came in for summer vacation in 2013. And
Got
I
it.
started going to the gym down there simply because I thought I needed to look, I'm going to try like lifting weights and see what happens. Um, I ended up enjoying going for that hour in the gym on a daily basis. It just felt good. I wasn't really making great diet choices even then. Like I would train for an hour, I would do whatever I thought, whatever I could think of, and then I would go and eat a pizza every day. It's because I
Mm,
thought like that's the only way to build muscle. Um, once I came back to college, I still wanted to continue going to the gym. And that's when I met Varun as well, who told me like you need to do your cardio, you need to train, and this is how you'll end up like changing yourself. I
mm,
did it the first few times. I started seeing the scale go down, and honestly, I just fell in love with it. Like I just fell in love with the feedback that I was getting from my body, and then I also fell in love with just like training at the gym and being with friends, and just the whole idea of like focusing on yourself, and just the bump that like lifting gives you,
Mm,
and the focus and like all the different things you feel like when you're lifting. So I fell in love with that, and that's pretty much where I started. And I realized like I want to see, or I started thinking about where or how far I could take this.
mm,
So what I would do was I had a mirror on my cupboard where I would write down the weight every morning,
mm,
and I had a goal weight of like this is what I want to be. Like so I think I started writing it on the mirror. Like when I first started, I was 95.
mm.
And then on the mirror, the last number that I wanted was 74. And I charted a path down, and every morning I would wake up and see, like, okay, how far have I reached? So every day that was my motivation to like just do it. I just wanted to see that scale go down. And I
Mm,
started feeling better. I started feeling more confident about myself. Um, and that culminated like into a really great like winter vacation where I came back home. None of the clothes that I used to wear before were good enough. Like they were all baggy and loose. Like people looked at me and were like, holy hell, like who are you? Like we don't know who you are. And I bought these like fitting clothes and I looked like a completely different person.
yeah.
And that motivation carried into like 2014 and 2015, where I started getting a little bit more deep into the deep into fitness, like trying to figure out how else I can push myself.
Mm,
um, since then it's just pretty much been a part of my life. Like think about I can't think about a day where I don't work out or do something.
mm,
It's just physical activity has become very important to me. um, Even through like, so we've been through a bunch of different like lockdowns in the last year. Gyms open for like barely 3 months and stuff, but even without the gyms, pretty much I feel like my day is not right if I don't do some sort of physical activity.
nice.
So in the first few months it was like doing some high intensity cardio. um, then in between I was doing some sort of like beach body programs where they would like, oh no, sorry, it was skipping rope. Like I would
Mm,
do this was like early in the year. And then nowadays, I pretty much just go for a walk every morning, which is what we were talking about before we started recording. I just feel like my mindset, like I'm able to get myself into the mindset for the day to get things moving. And I feel pretty much good, like when I get some sort of workout in.
yeah.
So that's pretty much where it is. And now I have like other larger goals that I want to pursue in this, where I want to reach. I haven't been able to stay ripped and lean all through the year. So this is one of the bigger goals that I want to work towards.
Nice, and like Sandesh, I know like one of the things that's coming to me from what you're sharing is this idea of fitness also being like a lifestyle and a philosophy, right?
Yeah,
It's not just about doing weights on a consistent basis, but it's also about eating well and sleeping well, but then thinking about the mental health consequences of being fit, right?
yeah,
When you take care of your health, you're generally feeling good about who you
yeah,
are and what you're doing. And when you spoke about the pandemic, like one of the things that's kept me sane in a lot of ways during the pandemic was developing my own understanding of what fitness is for me.
yeah,
And a lot of people look at fitness as you look at a product like somebody that's extremely fit and you feel like I want to get there tomorrow. But I think it's so important to understand what sort of journey you feel most strongly about. For instance, I really enjoy playing a sport to stay fit in terms of the cardio and then doing some weights and it's obviously not as intense as yours, but I feel like that's where I am at now with my journey and hopefully I can get it to another stage, in the coming months. But I
yeah,
feel like this is something that you can control in your life, right? Your
yeah,
health and your personal well-being, and the fact that you were able to invest those that sort of time in it, speaks a lot about your dedication to constantly improve on an
yeah,
individual basis. And if you think about the feedback loop for coding and fitness, right? You instantly get those results and see that if something's not working, you know why it's not working, and then you debug and you try and make it work. But even with fitness, like some days you need to know that you can't push too hard because your body isn't reacting,
yeah,
so you need to calm down and give it some rest, right? So
yeah,
that feedback loop works both ways. But
yeah,
but thanks for sharing that story about your fitness journey. Again, I want to be respectful of time. Can we go on for about 5 minutes or so, Sandesh?
yeah,
Is
yeah,
that
for
okay?
sure. I have plenty of time, but I just wanted to
Perfect.
go back really quick. Like you brought up some really, really great points. Um, Fitness is a lifestyle. Like it's definitely something that you have to dedicate yourself to.
Yeah.
It's not something that you do for 6 months and then be like, okay, now I'm going to do whatever I want and everything will be fine.
Yeah.
And because it's a lifestyle, you have to find out what is comfortable for you, what you enjoy doing, so that you can keep doing it.
Mm.
For me, it is lifting weights. For me, it is like doing any sort of like physical activity. Like I honestly don't mind doing anything as long as it gets me moving. But
Mm.
there are some people who enjoy running, or there are some people who enjoy walking or cycling or anything like that. So you have to find out like what works for you
Mm.
so you can keep doing it. It's the same thing for the diet as well. Like there's a lot of people who say things like a keto diet is the thing that will get you ripped or help you like maintain it throughout, or like balanced diet or paleo or whatever. Like honestly, it's just about finding the foods that you love
Mm.
and making sure that you can have those on a repeated basis.
Mm.
Um, and the other important thing that you brought up was about, I think you mentioned something along the lines of like the foundations, right? So I very strongly believe that if you don't have the foundations to like do some sort of physical activity right now, like as you are, I'm assuming all the listeners are like 20-year olds, but if you don't set up those foundations right now, it'll be very difficult to bring those into your life as you grow older.
Mm.
Like you see this in a lot of people where they don't end up like um, doing any sort of physical activity whatsoever, like in their 40s and 50s. And it's simply because they never did that before. But if
Sure.
you start now and you maintain it, you'll be able to keep a healthy body and keep a healthy body for a long time.
Mm. Yeah, and that those are actually great ways to look at this, Sandesh. And it's nice that we were able to look at your work and your passion for fitness. But Sandesh, what I wanted to end this interview with, again, I can go on into so many details for every single part of your life. I would have loved to talk about your journey um, as a third culture kid, or working in different countries like New York and Toronto, and what's that like for you, your passion for gaming. But maybe another interview another day. But what I wanted to end this interview with was, I know you read a lot, Sandesh, but also um, you're also constantly learning and looking at other people and how they learn. So if you had to, recommend a few people, or like there's somebody that you feel um, that inspires you in terms of their vision for how they're going about designing their careers or solving problems, do you feel like, are there any people that come out to off the top of your head in terms of entrepreneurs or writers or thinkers or whatever? Or if you don't think it's a person, was there a book that sort of got you thinking or opened up your thinking? So just maybe a person or a book that you feel really inspires you in some sort of way.
Yeah, I think, to be very honest, like I have inspirations across like different passions of
Mm.
mine. So when it comes to like building businesses like startups and entrepreneurial journeys, like there's this person called Preetham Nath.
Mm.
He was one of my roommates in Bangalore, and he writes a lot on Twitter about like building products, and he has a newsletter where he talks about it. Really great stuff. I think talks a lot about the fundamentals of building a tech product, about building a tech startup, and I think it's really great knowledge for anyone who wants to build their own business.
Nice.
When I think about uh, like any sort of like creative stuff, I think about Kunal. I think he's doing a wonderful job, like trying to figure out like how to create things, and it's just a matter of like watching his process, and you'll figure out how you can do that for yourself. I have a lot of like people I follow in the bodybuilding space. Like these are all Canadian bodybuilders and people from the US. Again, like I don't really look for like hacks and tips and tricks and like things like that. It's more about, for me, like watching their process
Mm.
and seeing how their mindset uh, is represented in that,
Mm.
and then trying to figure out like how does that apply to me, like what is the principle they're going for.
Mm.
um, so yeah, that's pretty much like the things that I've done, or I look for in inspiration right now.
Nice.
Aside
And
from that, I think there's a lot of information on the internet. Like it's an ever evolving space. Like you can always search for something on Google and find it. um, I honestly don't have any book recommendations because I don't read books as much anymore.
awesome. I mean, that's a good start. What I will do is I will link Preetham's newsletter. I'll also link Kunal's interview in the show. And all of Sandesh's short films and his other work and the companies he's working for in the show notes. So again, 1 hour is not enough time to really understand a person's journey up to now, but hopefully this was a start in the right direction. What I'd also recommend is following this interview up with the interview on the Primate podcast, where Sandesh goes into more details about his journey. And maybe reach out to him if you have a question or two about his journey as an entrepreneur and his journey in terms of fitness. But Sandesh, again, thanks for being so inspiring, and thanks for your time today. I really really appreciate you taking out the time to do this with us, and hopefully in some small way we were able to create like a visual sort of archive of your journey right now. And that's one of the objectives of the show. 10 years down the line, you look at this interview and you're like, okay, that's who I was in some sort of way. But it can't be completely accurate, but hopefully it points in the right direction, Sandesh. But thank you again.
Yeah,
um,
thanks for having me. Like, I really appreciate it. And to your point, like, yeah, I hope I'm able to look back at this 10 years and cringe,
yeah.
just because I'll be much better off then.
Yeah, which is a good way to end. I mean, a positive note to like end the show. But until next time, we're gonna end this episode of Learning Stories. Stay tuned for more episodes and more amazing profiles of people doing things and possibly changing the world in their own little small way. Um, Thank you again.